Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because, well, we are about to completely dismantle a universally accepted fact about human behavior. For years, pretty much all of us have operated under the assumption that our self-control is a physical resource, something we can literally run out of. But what if the science just doesn't back that up anymore? What if the limits you feel are actually just a cognitive illusion? Get ready, because we are rethinking literally everything we know about self-discipline.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the willpower myth. Then we'll move into the neuroscience of habits, explore something called the process model, break down motivation and attention, and finally, look at rewiring your brain.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1, the willpower myth. Look, we all know this exact feeling, right? You've spent the entire day resisting temptations. You held your tongue in a super frustrating meeting, you bravely skipped those donuts sitting in the break room, and you forced yourself to just sit down and finish a really difficult report. By the time you get home, you are just mentally exhausted. You just want to order takeout, crash on the couch, and scroll on your phone. It physically feels like your tank is on empty. And for a really long time, psychology essentially told us that feeling was entirely literal.
And this brings us to a specific term, ego depletion. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, a researcher named Roy Baumeister introduced this resource model of self-control. His theory proposed that overriding your impulses actually consumes a limited inner energy. It was a really elegant idea, and society quickly adopted the metaphor. We basically started treating willpower exactly like a car's fuel tank. You use it too much and you simply run out of gas. It became the foundational excuse for why we give up on our goals at the end of a long day.
But then the replication crisis hit psychology, and it hit hard. Take a discussion from the Slate Star Codex Reddit community, for example. The internet discourse really caught fire as the science began to unravel. Users pointed out that ego depletion was one of the phenomena hit hardest by the crisis. Researchers across the board were struggling to prove this fuel tank even existed in the first place. And worse, as that Reddit thread highlights, believing that you are out of willpower becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Believing in ego depletion actively leads to worse career, health, and happiness outcomes.
So, here is the absolutely crucial contrast. The old view told us willpower is a battery that drains, but the new view reveals that a willpower failure is actually just a shift in your priorities and your attention. Think about that for a second. You don't lose the physical ability to control yourself, you just lose the motivation to do it. But to really grasp why this shift happens, we have to look under the hood at the actual physical wiring of our brains.
Section 2, the neuroscience of habits.
Dr. Lynn Reed explains that to save cognitive load, our brains rely heavily on habits, which run on an incredibly efficient three-step loop. First, you have the cue. That's a trigger, like feeling stressed out. Second is the routine, the behavior itself, maybe eating a cookie. And third is the reward, the positive outcome that reinforces the whole cycle. Deep inside your brain, a region called the basal ganglia stores these as chunked sequences. Once a behavior is chunked in there, it requires almost zero conscious effort. It runs purely on autopilot. And driving this entire loop is a neurotransmitter you've definitely heard of, dopamine. This is basically the brain's currency of motivation. Dr. Reed's research shows that dopamine spikes when a reward exceeds our expectations. But here is the truly fascinating part. As a habit becomes more and more entrenched, the brain's dopamine response literally shifts. It stops spiking at the reward itself, and it starts spiking at the cue. That is exactly why bad habits persist even when the actual reward isn't really satisfying anymore. The motivation has entirely transferred directly to the trigger.
Now, building these automated neural pathways doesn't just happen overnight, but through neuroplasticity, it is completely achievable. Research suggests it takes an average of 66 days for a new behavior to become fully automatic. Now, sure, it can range anywhere from 18 to over 250 days, depending on how complex the task is, but 66 days is a fantastic concrete benchmark. That's the average time it takes for neuroplasticity to take over, meaning you essentially no longer need conscious effort to get that thing done.
Section 3, the process model.
Enter this incredibly pivotal paper by researchers Michael Inslicht and Brandon J. Schmeichel. They set out to answer a really simple but massive question. What is ego depletion really? Because if the empty tank metaphor is flawed, they needed a mechanistic revision. They needed to redefine exactly what happens in our minds when we fail to resist a temptation after a period of hard work.
And this brilliantly illustrates their conclusion, which is known today as the process model. Think of self-control not as a gas tank, but as a system of interlocking cognitive gears. When you exert self-control at time 1, it causes these temporary mechanical shifts in both your motivation and your attention. These shifts then actively undermine your self-control at time 2. So let's break down exactly what these two gears are doing.
Section 4, Motivation and Attention. So that first gear is motivation. The process model basically argues that engaging in self-control is just plain hard work. When you do it for a while, your drive to exert control goes down and your drive to act on impulse goes way up. You experience what's called self-licensing. You feel like you've done your part, and frankly, you feel like you are owed a break. It is not that you can't control yourself, it's that you actively choose not to. Because suddenly, sitting on the couch with a bag of chips just feels far more appealing than doing more work.
The second gear, turning right in tandem with motivation, is attention. To exert self-control, your brain relies on a monitoring system specifically located in the anterior cingulate cortex to detect conflicts with your long-term goals. But after exerting a lot of effort, this system gets dulled. You literally stop paying attention to the cues that signal you need to be in control, and simultaneously, you become hyper-fixated on finding a quick dopamine hit. Studies actually show that depleted individuals become highly sensitive to reward symbols, like dollar signs. Your brain basically stops looking for problems and frantically scans for pleasure. So here is the ultimate takeaway from all this. If willpower is really about motivation and attention, then your mindset heavily dictates your performance. There's some fascinating research from Job and Dweck that found people who believe willpower is unlimited are not easily depleted. Let me just repeat that. If you believe your willpower is self-renewing, you maintain your self-control. Willpower really truly is in your head. Your personal beliefs shape your actual capacity.
Section 5, Rewiring your brain. Now, if we want to stop relying on this whole illusion of brute force willpower, we have to hack our habit loops. Dr. Reed provides some incredibly actionable steps for dismantling those old neural pathways. Because you can't just try harder, right? First, change the cue. Identify and literally eliminate the trigger that's prompting the behavior. Second, interrupt the routine. Consciously replace that bad behavior with a healthy alternative. And third, reframe the reward. Actively celebrate the benefits of this new behavior to give your brain that necessary positive reinforcement it's looking for. Conversely, when you're forming new, good habits, you want to build strong neural pathways. Set clear cues using environment design so the right choice is just obvious. Make the routine easy by simplifying the behavior as much as possible to reduce cognitive resistance. And finally, reinforce the reward to strengthen that dopamine loop. Remember, willpower is just the initial, temporary tool you use to set up your environment, at least until the basal ganglia takes over and runs the whole show on autopilot. Which brings us to our final thought. We've seen today that the fuel tank is a complete myth. Failure is just a shifting of your brain's motivational and attentional gears, and people who believe their willpower is unlimited actually perform better. So I'll leave you with this question. Are the limits of your willpower just a story you've been telling yourself? It is incredibly empowering to realize you have so much more personal agency than you thought. The boundaries are literally in your mind, and now you have the blueprint to redraw them. Thanks so much for joining this explainer, and keep learning.